Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Quinn Young and I work in the Office of Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity, and today we're going to be talking about poster design. If you are presenting at our symposium at the end of April, you will likely be presenting a poster in which we'll be discussing how to prepare it, how to design it, and how to present it a little bit in this video. So, what's the purpose of an academic poster? A question that I know I certainly didn't know the answer to until I started learning about it. The purpose of an academic poster is to display information in a clear and concise way that encourages your audience to engage in some discourse about the topic that you're presenting. You want to get people interested in the stuff that you've been researching or working on, and you want your poster to be that stepping off point for you to have that conversation. Now, with the understanding of what the purpose of a poster is, let's talk about preparing for your poster. The first thing that I recommend doing is consulting the rubric or the guidelines for the conference or symposium that you're presenting at. You'll likely find some sort of information about what is expected of you, and then you should keep that in your back pocket when designing it. After you have a little idea of what's expected, I'd recommend talking with a counselor or your mentor who has a little bit more experience in making these and get some of their tips and tricks before you go and tackle everything. With all of that information together, I would recommend starting with a storyboard and some sort of outline so that you can create a plan going forward for what you need to finish first and where everything's going to go. When writing everything on there, I'd say use concise writing. You don't need to have it super lengthy at the start. You just need to start the ball rolling and getting information on your page. Like with any sort of presentation or any sort of writing style, you should make sure you're adding transitions just so that your flow stays consistent throughout both your prep and your final poster. Now that we're getting our prep underway, let's talk about presenting the information on your poster. It's important to keep in mind that your audience doesn't know anything about your poster until you give them that information. So you should build in some context into why you're doing the research that you're doing, as well as making sure that your tone and your diction inside of your poster is readable to an audience that is not educated in the same topic, but still an educated audience. Also, a good rule of thumb when designing your poster is you want it to be more graphics heavy and less text heavy. It's hard to read a lot of words on a page, but it's a lot easier to see pictures and decipher what they mean. So when putting it together, make sure that you're being mindful of the amount of text compared to the amount of graphics that you're using. In that, when going and editing, make sure you're avoiding any grammar or typographical errors when putting everything together, and give it a good once-over before you call yourself done. All right, now let's get into our poster and designing it proper. In front of us, we have this template. You can access either this template or a few other templates on our website at nau.edu/symposium. On that page, you'll navigate to the student section and the presentation section, and you'll find more information there. We'll also put a link at the bottom of this video. Now, at the top of the poster, you'll see a big title. Under that title, you'll see some names, a department and a university, and then to the left of that, there is the logo. That'll be pretty common for most presentations. And then under all of that, you'll have your information about your abstract, your introduction, your results, your methods, and all of that other stuff, and we'll go into each section one by one. To start, we're going to talk about your title. Your title is this big thing. It's supposed to be eye-catching and get everybody involved. Your title should be specific. You want to use simple word combinations. That way you can read it from afar and it's not too difficult to decipher. You want to avoid using abbreviations or acronyms. Again, your audience is this educated but non-technical audience, so you don't want to use acronyms that would be specific to your field because people coming up won't know what that means. And avoid using shorthand notation, so write scientific names in full. Again, your audience doesn't necessarily have the same knowledge base as you do. Good rule of thumb is avoid using Roman numerals. They are often confused with just letter I's, and they can make it difficult to read from a distance. Under your title will be where you put your names and your department and school. Your name should include all members of your group if it's more than one, any faculty that you've worked with, and any other people who need to be given credit. That'll all go right under your title. Just below that, you'll put the department that you're working under, as well as university. For a symposium, that'll look like any of the colleges that you're working with, or departments, and then the NAU, Northern Arizona University. Just to the left will be the logo, and you want to use an up-to-date NAU logo. You can find those either on our website, or we'll put another link at the bottom of this video for you to access those really easily. Now, let's get into the bulk of all of this. Now, under all of that information are going to be the headings of all of your larger topics for what you're talking about. And here's another example to my left. Or here's another example. Here you have that title, all that other information, and then below that they start with an introduction. That introduction might also be an abstract depending on what's the most relevant to your field of study. Some projects make more sense to have an abstract, some projects make more sense to have an introduction. Some use both, like this example here. For your abstract, we've already made a video on how to write an abstract, so I will just refer you to that video. We'll have that linked at the bottom of this video as well. Or you can find it on our YouTube page looking at the Symposiums playlist. So, your introduction. For your introduction, you want to bring context into what your research is about. That way, people know where you're coming from in the project that you started, as well as what has come before you in this project. May it be other researchers, other departments have been working on a similar topic. Your introduction is where you introduce all of these ideas in one place, that way you can hook your audience in. Generally, following your introduction will be your methods section. This section is where you'll communicate to your audience the procedures that you used in the research that you're doing. You want to keep in mind that you want this to be a detailed list of the steps that you took. That way, someone looking at your poster could have an idea or could make a plan to replicate the research that you have done. In your method section, you want to make sure that you are keeping your information concise and to the point, and you want to include text and subheadings to group content. That way, there's a clear flow for people to follow. That may also include adding a flow chart to help navigate the way that people read it, as well as, if relevant, you want to keep your subjects. Maybe there's an experimental design or the equipment used and other context building clues into how you did the research that you did. In this section, this is a good place to discuss any challenges that you ran into while doing your research, and this may also include citations of where you took bits of information from other people's research or past projects. What logically makes sense to follow the method section? The results section. After you've shown your audience how you got the information that you have, you should display the information that you have. And that will likely look like a brief summary of the data or the reports that you have come up with from your findings. This makes sense in an image-based way if you're able to graph your data, or maybe you have photographs of the data that you wanted to show. It's a good rule of thumb to not present raw data. It's hard to read raw data because, as someone without the context of the project, it doesn't make sense to you. It makes sense maybe to you as the researcher, but not to your audience. So finding ways to more clearly communicate that information is really important. Graphs are a great tool to do that, especially when working with statistical data. If you have photographs or any photography of the information that you were working with, that is always a good way to go as well. Your results section is usually the largest section just because it holds the bulk of what you were doing, and so this makes sense to go either in the middle of your poster or near the end. You want to, again, make sure that your poster is flowing, so if you follow the introduction to the methods to the results, that's usually about the middle portion of your poster. Now that we have our results on the board, let's talk about what those results mean. Generally, following results, you'll have your conclusion or your discussion section. This is where you will interpret the data that you just presented to us, as well as give us some expectations of what that data will mean to us or to the field that you're working in. The conclusion and discussion section is a good place to mention any alternative explanations for the information that you found, as well as bringing back into context what that research or your project or that data means to the rest of us or to your field. It's important in this section to really bring everything home. This is usually the last section that you'll have on your poster, so you want to again communicate why this is important, as well as what the problem was and how the data that you had just found either solved or enhances or changes the problem that you were originally starting off in your project. Usually this section can either easily be bullet pointed or is a brief paragraph summing all of these points up. There's a brief example, one's just bullet points, as well as there's a good section to talk about what should happen next. So in this example, they have a future project section, which is something you could implement in your own poster. Alrighty, let's talk about the appearance of your poster. This is my favorite section because it's where you get to be more creative with how you display all this information. Some good things to keep in mind when working on your appearance. You want it to be a visually interesting and visually stimulating experience for your audience. So you want to keep in mind using some graphics, some pictures, that way you have some visual context, as well as differentiating between headings and subheadings with different fonts, or generally different size fonts, usually the same font but a different size, bolding, italicizing to build emphasis, and all of that. You also want to make sure that your display of your poster, it has a logical flow. Like I was talking about before, if you start with your introduction and that flows into your methods and then your results and your discussion, there's a clear flow of the logic there, and you should try to do the same thing with where everything's positioned on your poster. There's a few examples here. The one at the top has a flow chart which clearly points you in the direction that you need to go, but under that everything follows chronologically in the order in which you did the experiment, and then when you got the results and when you discussed it. Like, there's a logical flow that you can follow, both in those eras that I was talking about as well as in the positioning on the poster. So a few specific things. So we zoomed in through that one poster, now we're looking at fonts. You should use a traditional singular font. You don't want too much variety in there. I recommend Arial, Times New Roman, or any other font that you'd use on like a normal paper that you would be submitting. You don't want to use more than 2 fonts. 3 might be a lot, as long as you have a logical reasoning for why you have different fonts. May that be your headings are in a bolder font, and then your information is a little bit smaller. In connection with that, we have a little chart here that shows you the average size that your font should be for the different sections, title naturally being the largest, headings being smaller, subheadings smaller than that, the main body and your citations the smallest. It's important to space everything out, that way you can build interest and have your audience flow through the chart. Just like this little graphic shows, you're going to read the big stuff first, and then maybe read the smaller stuff. You're only going to get those bolded bits and bobs further down in that smaller text, just because it's harder to read small text, and if there's a lot of it, that can be overwhelming and you might just gloss over things. So keep in mind where you want the emphasis and bold or italicize those sections, but make sure to avoid using all caps, as that can be a different type of overstimulating. Having everything in all caps just makes it harder to read, because then all of your A's look the same. Maybe it needs to be something else. Alright, so the last thing that I want to go over is just the general appearance and maybe a layout that you can do. Throughout all of this presentation, we have a few very similar layouts where it's that top banner at the top that has your title and all of that general information, and then below that are all these other sections. That'll be pretty consistent for most of your posters. The part that you're going to have the most creative freedom is that layout on the bottom of where everything goes. In this one, we see, again, that abstract introduction on the left and that conclusion and references final section on the right. And that makes sense for a lot of posters, but if you have an idea and you want to have all of your introduction and all of that at the top, and then you work your way down in kind of like maybe a hourglass shape, you could have that as well. That again will bring your audience from the introduction all the way down to the conclusion. No matter what you do, you want to make sure that your poster flows in a very organic way. If it doesn't flow, it's going to be harder to read, and you're not going to clearly communicate your information well. And if one can't follow it, it's hard to have a conversation about it. So that's what I would keep in mind. A few other things that I would note is you want to make sure that your poster is a standalone piece. If you aren't able to be next to your poster for a moment, you want someone to be able to come up, read it, and have a good understanding of what you were doing without you having to explain everything. So those are some good things to keep in mind. This year, our symposium is on April 28th, and the last day to upload anything for the symposium is April 21st, so you should keep that in mind. If you're listening to this at a later date, the updated dates will be on our website at nau.edu/symposium, and you can look for what those deadlines will be for you then. If you have any other questions for myself or the rest of our office, feel free to email us at ug-research@nau.edu, or follow us on social media. You can ask us questions there as well. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and I'm excited to see your posters at the symposium. Have a good one.